routine. Today we're gonna do something different, right? We've been analyzing deals every single day for the past 500 plus days. And I'm getting into a stage of my content creation where, okay, I get it. I've been doing underwriting for 18 minutes a day. And I was just looking at my daughter, and she's grown up so fast the other day. And after interviewing affordable housing guests for over the past 2.5, 3 years, I just accumulated so much knowledge in those 3 years, and I wanted to download all the different items that I have learned. But to do that, I want to start from the very, very basics, and I want to be able to explain it to my daughter when she's 8 or 10 years old, and I want to come up with fun ideas on how to explain certain concepts, certain vocabulary in a way that she can understand as a child. So I'm looking for feedback. Let me know if this works for you. Leave a comment, or if you have better analogies about explaining some of these terms like contracts with your kids every single day that you think that might be real important, it might be like really resonate with them, leave a comment down below. I'm really open to feedback, and I want to hear from all of you. So today we're going to explore the world of real estate contracts, right? Again, does not insurance, legal, investment advice. I'm not an attorney. I'm just trying to explain something that I wish someone explained to me in a simple manner, because we live in a world with all this jargon, all this vocabulary where people are trying to sound smarter than they might be. And that's okay. I mean, that's their presentation. I tell people all the time, I don't try to be the smartest person in every room I'm in. If I can, I'd rather be the least intelligent person in that room, because then I get to learn from folks that I care about. So today, we're going to talk about real estate contracts. And essentially, these are the documents that lay out the promises between two or three people, however many people that you might have. And essentially, they're almost like a blueprint, right? They lay out exactly your understanding for whatever agreement you have in place, right? We're trying to keep this fun and digestible for even a 10-year-old so that my daughter can really learn how to do it. So let's think about it first. So, what exactly is a contract? Ever had to explain that one before? So I looked up the definition, and a contract is a legally binding agreement where parties exchange promises or performances in general for some sort of consideration of value. Now, the analogy I like to use, and I was trying to think about, like, okay, when I was 10, what was I doing? So imagine you're trading Pokemon cards with a friend, and you say, hey, I'll give you this rare, shiny holographic card if you give me two of those super strong cards, one for two, but you guys value them differently, and you might think that is a fair trade, right? So that's like a mini contract. Each side is offering something of value for one another. Next up, right? So in real estate, these trades are more formal. It has to be in writing. And this is where two or more parties promise to do something. In this case, it's usually when you have to sell a house while the other buyer is going to pay a certain amount. And once you put it in writing, it becomes official, right? So the next thing I want to talk about is, okay, now that we've covered what is a contract. Sometimes people ask me, hey, do real estate agreements always need to be in writing? And in many cases, yes, right? Laws typically will say that property transactions should be on paper with signatures. And this ensures that everyone knows the deal's details, and reducing any like he said, she said scenarios where people were not clear on what was agreed upon and what amendments or continues were there. Okay. Now, going forward, let's talk about, okay, what are the elements of a valid contract? And if you think of a contract as a recipe that lists out every single ingredient that's necessary for you to write out, here are the key ingredients, right? Number one, you got to have capable parties, right? Everybody signing must be an adult of sound mind. There's no forced participation or confusion or duress. Number two, there's mutual consent, right? All sides have to agree. And typically that's through an offer and an acceptance. And then the contract needs to have a lawful objective, right? You can't sign a contract to do something illegal, right? Might not be enforceable. And then finally, there needs to be consideration, right? Something of value exchange, like money, a promise to perform, an act. Sometimes if you're doing consulting, it's agreeing to spend a certain number of time, hours that you list out for whatever your support might be and what those activities within the support might be. Okay. Now, what are the different types of contracts? I want to go through a few different terms that gets thrown around a lot. There is express or implied types of contracts. And in express contracts, right, the terms are clearly stated in word, either they're spoken or written. And implied are typically the actions or the circumstances which imply the agreement, even though there isn't an explicit word or explicit writing agreement that's in place, right? So express contract might be saying, hey, lemonade for 50 cents. And everyone understands that, hey, if you want to buy a cup of lemonade, that's 50 cents. Implied is more like you handing someone a glass of lemonade, or maybe you ever listen to the radio, they'll say, hey, the 100th caller will get $1,000, right? Whatever the number be. So even though there is an acceptance there, it's implied like, hey, that is what's going to happen if you happen to be the 100th caller calling into the radio station. It's a similar concept for bilateral versus unilateral, right? Bilateral contracts means that both sides promise to do something, right? I'll sell you my house and you promise I'll pay you X dollars for that house. Unilateral means that one person makes a promise. So, hey, maybe you ever seen like a lost puppy poster that gets hung up in the neighborhood, right? I'll pay you $100 reward if you help me find my lost puppy. Now, no one is forced to go look for that lost puppy, but if they do and they bring the puppy back, you must pay because you listed that poster out there, right? So that's how I like to think about bilateral or unilateral type of contracts. Okay. Now, the other types of terms you want to know about when it comes to contracts is valid, void, voidable, and unenforceable, right? Valid is just exactly what it sounds like. It means all the necessary ingredients that we talked about earlier. A void contract typically means that you're missing an essential element, right? So it's no go. Like that contract is not valid, even though you called it a contract. It didn't have those ingredients. Maybe it was with a 6-year-old child. You can't have a contract with a 6-year-old child. They don't technically have the capacity to enter into a formal agreement like that. Okay. Next, voidable. This is a little more gray, but a voidable contract, it says essentially it might be canceled by one side if something wasn't right. If one party was lied to, or if somebody was underage, they didn't have the mental capacity to, that's something you want to look at. Okay. And then there's unenforceable contracts. And that is typically a contract that looks okay on the surface, but usually there isn't there's a reason why it can't be enforced in court. Maybe it requires specific documentation. So some things that you want to be really, really understanding about all that stuff. So we talked about bilateral contracts, unilateral contracts, all these different items. And I think those are all really, really important for you to kind of figure out. Now, in real estate, there's a lot of times when you make an offer, there is a thing called contingencies. And contingencies are conditions that must be met for that agreement to go forward. So maybe the buyer of your house needs approval for financing, right? If they can't qualify for a loan, now they don't have the money to buy your house. So they can't close on the house if they don't have the funds to buy the house for the agreed upon price that you're looking for. Or they might have an inspection contingency where essentially they say, hey, the inspection has to come back clean. If the condition isn't met, then one or both sides can back away from the transaction without any penalty. Typically, a buyer, whenever they are submitting a contract to buy a property, they put down what is called a EMD, earnest money deposit, to signal to the seller that they are serious about buying the property. And they're putting some sort of consideration, and this consideration, it's liquidity, it's financial consideration, so that you can show that you're serious about it, right? So I'm trying to think about what do 10 years do? Maybe you're at a school talent show, right? You agree to perform the talent show if you can use your favorite microphone. I'm just making this up. And if that microphone isn't available, then you don't have to go on stage, even though you promised to perform on stage. But because of a contingency, right? It's a what if. What if I don't have my favorite mic? What if I don't have my stuff with me that I promise, right? Similar to performance artists, if they get signed to a music festival to perform a certain way, they might say, hey, I will only perform if I have uh, 10 cheeseburgers in my break room so that I can eat my favorite food before I go perform. It's things like that, right? It's wild, but I'm trying to think about very easy analogies to think about, hey, what do continues mean in real life? Okay. Finally, next section about contracts. And I know I'm going really fast, so just leave a comment below if you thought this was helpful or going too fast because I'm not trying to bore my daughter to death. I'm just trying to explain these concepts in a very simple way so that she can digest it from someone that's looking to not impress her, but explain something to my daughter that she can understand. It's really important to me. So I'm looking for feedback, guys. So next section is the performance and discharge of contracts, right? So performance just means like, hey, everybody did what they promised. So maybe someone said, hey, I promise to pay you money. And then the other person, the seller in this scenario, has to hand over the keys, right? That's the ideal ending for a project. I mean, for a contract. Everybody does what they said they were going to do and what they agreed on writing to do. Now, discharge is when a contract ends for various reasons, and maybe it was fulfilled, so that's okay. But then, or it could be a situation where everybody agreed to cancel, right? For some reason, you guys start looking at the property, and you're like, hey, you want to change my mind? They changed their mind, and or someone just didn't hold up their end, right? All this stuff can matter. Now, performance. How would I use it for a 10-year-old? Think about doing your chores, right? Your chore chart. If you do the chores, you get your reward, and the chore chart is complete if that's how you organize the chores in your home. Now, discharge is maybe you decided to tear up that chore chart or erase it if you're using a whiteboard midway because you're okay with dropping off it or it becomes impossible to finish, right? Maybe you agree to vacuum the home for certain amount of allowance, but then the vacuum breaks. Okay, you can't vacuum the floor anymore, right? So maybe you guys agreed like, hey, you don't have to vacuum today. So discharge from their chore obligation. Just think about it, right? Now, another big question when it comes to contracts is that, hey, what happens if someone breaks a deal or they go against a contract, right? And if they don't do what they promised in that contract, that's known as a breach. And when someone doesn't do what they promised within a contract, then there are potential outcomes where one, it might be called damages, right? The innocent party might get money for their losses, right? In a real estate transaction, maybe they lose their EMD, right? If that person didn't buy the house, even though they had no reasons from the financing contingency to not close on home, right? They got approved for the loan, like they should be closing on it, but then they just decided to back out. So they should lose on that, right? Let's say that the person did not have an inspection contingency, but then they go into escrow, right? They make an offer, the seller accepts that offer and notifies the buyer that they accepted that offer. But there was something wrong with the roof. But the buyer never said, hey, this purchase is contingent upon the roof being in good shape or contingent on the home being in good shape, which is what a inspection contingency is typically for. Then they might lose money for not performing their contract. Then other sorts of outcome when someone doesn't do is there's a term called specific performance. And if you don't do what you said you were going to do, technically a judge could look at the deal between the two parties and say the judge can order them to follow through on what was agreed. And in this scenario, it might be, hey, look, they did everything they were going to do. You have to hand over the ownership to the property. You can't change your mind if they did everything what they were going to do. Okay. Then there's cancellations, right? Maybe everybody walks away, agreed upon, but there might be some fees that were involved in that. So let's see. What might a 10-year-old do? Oh, I had an older brother. So let's say you promised your older brother or your sibling to do their chores for a week in return for playing their video game or borrowing their bike. But then you don't do the chores, then that sibling can ask you for something else or call a parent. And that's my judge in this scenario, right? To step in and say, hey, if you use their bike and you promise you want to do all the chores for a week, then you got to go in and do it. That's specific performance. All right. I know that was a little bit of a 10-year-old analogy, but I'm looking for ways. If you have better ideas for how to explain contracts to a 10-year-old, leave a comment down below. Again, this is not investment advice. This is not legal advice. I'm not an attorney. I'm just learning all this stuff about real estate and I'm trying to master it by being able to teach it back to someone like my daughter. And I like to think that if I can explain it in a way that my daughter can understand it, then I would have been a good dad. So that's why it's important to me. And I'm looking for feedback because I'm looking to become a better dad every single day. So I appreciate you spending this time with me. So, all right. So knowing all these like basics about contract, I mean, it's really important whether you're a first time home buyer or a seasoned investor. Contracts aren't just papers, right? They're roadmaps. They are pieces of paper. They're agreements that clearly outline everything that was agreed upon so that it's not a he said, she said type of thing where, hey, you said this, you said this. If you put it on writing, everything that you guys agreed on, that's how you eliminate any confusion and you provide clarity to an outsider that might look into the contract and say, hey, was this fair? Did you do what you said you were going to do? Because now, if you ever have to end up in the court of law, they're going to look at what was agreed. And that written word is going to be very, very important, right? So I know sometimes these terms can sound confusing, but I've always talked about, right? I had one content piece about partnerships, and I always talked about, hey, how is this partnership going to end? Because every single partnership is going to end no matter what, right? Either someone passes away, if we decide to sell an asset, sell a business, doesn't matter what it is. But if you don't talk about how that partnership is going to end, it's going to be very confusing at the end. And sometimes when you have that agreement in place, it's much more important that that's how you keep your friendship together. With sometimes you might be parting with family and friends, right? You got to have those discussions first. So I'm so appreciative that y'all tuned in today. If you could just subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Kent_HE, I would really appreciate it. Subscribe, sign up for our email list on affordablehousing.io. I want to keep you all updated on some of these different concepts as I try to explore some of these elementary type of concepts. But I have a lot of fun doing it. And selfishly, as a dad, I'm looking to explain these concepts to my daughter as she grows up. Hopefully, she listens to this one day, especially if she's interested in a lesson about contracts. Imagine she's taking a business law class and dad goes to her and say, "Hey, why don't you go look at my YouTube video?" And she's gonna be like, "Dad, you're not an attorney." And if she says that, I'm gonna have to agree with her. But this is fun, and I have a lot of fun doing it. So hey, subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you never miss a tip or my dad, my fatherly attempt on how to explain some of these concepts going forward. We'll try to keep everything straightforward. We'll try to use analogies that are fun, practical for a 10-year-old so that my daughter can look at this one day and know that we cared. So my hope is this, right? I hope you listen to this video today, explain the same concept about real estate contracts, and put it on your own YouTube channel. Because I've heard of parents saying, hey, I want this financial freedom or I want this freedom of choice and because I want to spend more time with my kids. And I can't help but one day think that, hey, we're not going to be around anymore. And who's going to be around for your kids when you're not there? Well, you can leave a video for them like this to show that you're spending time now to show them how much you care about explaining certain concepts. But I believe in leaving skills with our children, not money, not just wealth. Could you help them out? Yeah. But the skills is what they're going to take away. And that's so important to me. And getting them into the rooms of people with good hearts, just like people in this community, is so important. So I appreciate you all so much today for tuning in this live and listening to me talk about contracts. 'Cause that could be a little dry. So hey, have an amazing Wednesday, everybody. I hope you spend some quality time with your family and friends. And if you ever have a deal that you really want underwritten, I mean, just send them to me, Kent at affordablehousing.io. You can DM me anytime on LinkedIn or DM me anytime to Instagram at Invest with Kent He. Again, this is not investment advice. I'm not soliciting any investments on this call. I'm just trying to be the best dad possible for my kid by explaining certain concepts to them that I wish someone explained to me in a Very easy way. I didn't think I was going to talk about Pokemon cards, but hey, that worked out because I'm trying to figure out what was I doing as a 10-year-old. I was totally into Pokemon cards one day because that was the big thing, and they're still around. That's crazy, right? They're still around. All right. Anyways, have an amazing Wednesday. I'll see you all tomorrow for day 517 of going live. Have a good one, everybody.